Good morning, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to the 7th of our series of How Talent sessions. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you're keeping sane as well. It looks like we might be here for a little while longer, but let's hope that all remains well and that things don't get worse in terms of the outbreak. Fingers crossed. Anyway, back to business. So this morning's 7th session is all about reporting and insights, a critical area for HR, recruitment and talent acquisition teams. There's probably never been a better chance to, first of all, look at some basic housekeeping. And that basic housekeeping means if you've got an ATS or you've got a system in place, then all of that data is true. So the first bit of advice I give to you is to look at the data in your ATS. Make sure that all those statuses are up to date, the sources are up to date, and that kind of thing. It's the old adage of, you put rubbish in and you get rubbish out. And I can tell you quite specifically from our life here at JobTrain, we've been running quite a lot of historical reports using our own CRM system. And what that has highlighted is that there is still quite a bit of housekeeping that we could or should have done back in the day. So we're now retrospectively going back and making sure that our data is as clean and accurate as it can be. Also, with a JobTrain hat on, within our own world and our own product, around reporting, we're trying to do as much work as we can around placing actionable insights front and center for recruiters and doing as much of the hard work for you as we can. So quite specific examples of that is that we are currently in the process of rolling out our new platform to all of our clients, and part of that is new free standard functionality around an insights dashboard. So some of those basic metrics are going to include things like your advertising source effectiveness, time to approve, time to hire metrics, looking at diversity and the splits you've got around there, and also looking at key measurements like the hiring funnel. So what volumes have you got coming through your funnel, but also then looking at the process itself, looking quite closely at bottlenecks. So where are there delays in the process? Where should or where do we need to be taking action? So talking about reporting and data, it's not a specialist subject for me, I've got to say. So when I was thinking about who we might invite on for this session, one person sprang to mind straight away, and that's Alex, who's the head of talent acquisition for Cielo. Now, Cielo, if they're not known to you, are probably the leading providers within the recruitment process outsourcing space. And RPOs, by their very nature, have a commercial imperative around reporting and demonstrating the value that they offer to their customers and also driving efficiency. So I'm really pleased and grateful to Alex for joining me today and being the expert. So without further ado, I will invite Alex on. So just bear with me a second. There he is. Right, Alex, I'm inviting you on right now. So just while I'm waiting for Alex to join me, do ask questions, please. The ask a question button is just there next to the chat stream. So please ask questions. We'll be happy to answer them after this. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Giles. How you doing?
Good. You're coming through loud and clear. Thank you for sparing some time this morning to talk to us all about reporting and insights.
My absolute pleasure.
Quick introduction to you, some of your experience.
Oh, crikey. So a long time in agency, and then moved in-house, as do many people. Took a few short contracts to bring myself up to speed. And then 5 years ago, I joined Cielo, initially as a frontline recruiter on the Bupa account, worked my way up through management, set up their internal recruitment process management team, and currently looking after our own TA function as well as our MSP delivery team.
And as part of your role as sort of head of TA, you basically transformed that function. So as head of TA, your responsibilities for all the recruitment specifically for Cielo, is that right?
Yeah, across the UK, Europe and the Middle East.
Okay, brilliant. So you know a thing or two about reporting, especially from an RPO perspective, when customers are expecting complete transparency in terms of your activity and the value that you're delivering to your customers?
Very much so, from both a recruiter perspective to guide my own performance, and from a managerial perspective to look at the team as a whole and demonstrate the value that we're adding, and equally internally to see where our own people are coming from and how my own team is functioning, basically.
So if we get stuck in and if we go right back to basics, from your perspective, based on the experience you've got and all the rest of it, what should you be currently measuring, and what else could a TA function or heads of resourcing look at measuring?
So it's a really good question. So we report on pretty much anything that comes through the ATS. So that looks at individual metrics such as source of candidate, time to hire, time to offer. It looks at what roles are open, how long they've been open. We can segment them vertically. We can do it by recruiter, team, account, territory, continent, even if we wanted to. But it's not just what we do with that raw data. It's how we analyze it and interpret it. So it's making sure that if we take the old definition between efficiency and effectiveness, efficiency.
Love it. New word.
Yeah, hello, we've coined one. Is doing it right, and effectiveness is doing the right thing, and it's making sure we've got the right balance between those. So we can look at recruiter performance, both in terms of abstracts, but we can compare them against others. So we've got a fabulous reporting and analysis team. They take the raw data, they slice it and dice it in any number of different ways, so we can determine what's working well and what isn't.
I know that specialists in terms of reporting within a TA function is a growing role. But I know from our own experience at JobTrain that a lot of our clients that we work with don't have MI and data specialists within their team. So with that in mind, what advice would you give in terms of the absolute sort of basics, the meat and potatoes of reporting it and getting those things in place?
A lot depends on what you want out of your TA function. Mm-hmm. So for me, it needs to link in with HR in general, or people and culture, because not only are you looking at people coming into the business from the outside, but you're looking at internal mobility, people moving from function to function, developing as they move through their career. So for me, for an RPO, the key things are obviously going to be demonstrating that we're adding value. So no agency use, I guess, is the key thing.
Yeah.
But also looking at referrals, because we need to have a direct and indirect measure of EVP and brand effectiveness in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And so that's a fairly healthy measure. I'm sorry, I'm getting massive feedback here. Is it coming through your end?
Not for me.
As long as it's just me. But you also need to look at the internals as well, but also the sourcing mix of people that we find directly. But then you have the time to hire, and you can break that down from time to offer to start, time to start. There are a number of ways of slicing that out. And I think that's actually quite an important distinction to make, because it demonstrates the parts of the process that the TA function have control over. So yeah. Time to offer accept is a key metric for me. After that, the onboarding process is not entirely within my control. So yes, we do count that, but it's not as important to me when we're looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of the TA team. But also we're looking at source of hire. Is our recruitment marketing hitting the right place? Is our referral scheme competitive? Do we need referral scheme? And those sorts of things. But also you need to look at recruiter effectiveness. Obviously that will be tweaked depending on the vertical that they work in. So for example, you'd expect someone working in a contact center hire environment to have a lower time to hire, but to manage a higher volume than people working in HQ or corporate functions. So it's being able to understand that data and overlay it with the background of where they're coming from. But the key ones are always time to hire, source of hire, recruiter efficiency, and then of course you can look at the funnel in terms of applicants to interviews to offers to accepts and those sorts of things.
And I guess looking at that funnel also then allows you to get a better grasp or a better grip and understanding of where there are potential bottlenecks as well.
Yes.
In terms of lags within those stages of the process.
Absolutely. And this is where, and I would say this as a recruiter, being able to get some information on hiring manager efficiency is really useful, because the bottlenecks aren't always sat with recruiters. And over a period of time, one tends to find that the same hiring managers or potentially hiring communities have the bottlenecks. It could be time to getting back to CVs. It could be outreach to agency, out of process or out of agreement. It could be just they're too busy to hire. And we've all been in that situation when we know that we need someone to fill a gap, but that gap still needs to generate some outputs, reports, processes, whatever in the interim.
Yeah. Do you ever measure other elements? So we looked at hiring managers in terms of other stakeholders in the process, where sometimes there can be a lag and it's important to identify, drill down into, and then share that data. But what about things like basic approvals and that kind of thing? Because again, you've got additional stakeholders outside of the TA function that are involved in that sign-off process for a new requisition. What about that?
It depends on the sophistication of the HRIS or ATS that you're using. Mm-hmm. So for organizations where it's integrated and it's a hierarchical approval process, which is one approval is triggered by the next, to an extent, we might not get sight of that other than weekly updates, anecdotal insights. You know, we will be looking for one of these type conversations that we have with the hiring communities. So in that instance, it can be hard to tell. If it's a slightly more manual process, which we can influence and chase up and cajole, yes, that's going to be important too. But a lot depends on the economic situation. So for us at the moment, there are at least two extra levels of approval that are needed to make sure that we can't resource that particular need internally.
Oh, I think you're frozen now. You still with us?
I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Got you now. So with all of that in mind, and on the basis that you have a pretty clear idea about the very basic levels or the very basic reports you need to be producing, how would you then suggest that you take that data and actually action it in some way? Because I think that sometimes it's all well and good having all the right reports in place, but how do you then best take that data and then transfer that into something that you can then action and improve?
The key point there for me is agreeing with the various stakeholder communities what's key step. So for HR, for example, it's going to be time to hire, or whoever the key stakeholders that own the TA relationship and represent them at the SLT or executive level. On an individual hiring manager or hiring community basis, there might be different elements. So for hard to fill roles, for example, it's the use of the talent pool. And one of the areas we, for example, report on is making sure that we engage with silver medalists, or we use workforce planning where we know there are going to be hard to fill roles. So it's not just reactive. And we can monitor and track the growth of that talent pool, how we content market to them, how we seek engagement. And there are all sorts of bits of kit on the market that can help with that for you. But the key bit is, what would be key to you, Giles? Identify 4, 5 key areas, come up with a format of report and commentary which works for you, which can be easily digested, and we can have regular meetings to talk it through. Yeah. And over a period of time, that will evolve.
And we, some of this we're talking about TA quite specifically, but do you and have you produced reports specific to other stakeholders in the business? And if so, what do they look like and what works best?
Sorry, you broke up slightly there.
All right, okay. So we talked quite specifically about TA, but looking at other stakeholders, what reports have you or do you produce for other stakeholders? What do they report on, and what kind of insight or potential actions do they communicate?
So if we take a standard account, we'll have weekly key metrics, which are the really key ones: roles that have been opened, roles that are aging, fills, the kind of transactional piece that you'd expect. On a monthly and quarterly basis, we get the opportunity to look at these from a slightly more historic basis and can start identifying trends or bottlenecks or opportunities for improvement. And that's where the dialogue piece of the reporting piece really comes into its own, because we can take that data and investigate it on our own account, but also explore it with key stakeholders to get their input, because ultimately TA in any capacity or any incarnation is a partnership with the stakeholding community. So it's very important that that dialogue is ongoing to identify the areas that are going to be of interest.
And how do you achieve that dialogue? And do you create sort of protective time in order to have those conversations, assess the data, and then agree collectively what actions need to be taken or will be taken?
Very much so. So there are standard format reports, depending on the period covered. There are regular slots booked in to talk about this. So from an internal perspective, we have a weekly meeting where there's a general update given. We look at internal redeployment and all those sorts of issues. We then have a monthly report and a quarterly review. Sorry, the feedback is getting me. And it's very much the same with clients. So therefore we can identify what needs to be changed, how. So it could be, for example, we're seeing that our attraction or effectiveness of our attraction and recruitment marketing has dropped off in a particular area. We know from our workforce planning that a need is going to come up to fulfill a project or expected internal mobility or an acquisition. So therefore, through that dialogue, we can tweak our RM portfolio, redeploy spend, so we can start focusing on talent pooling activities as well, and engaging with candidates before the roles actually come up. So where always possible, we try and be on the front foot. But that's not going to come necessarily from historic data. It's using that in historic data to inform conversations with the stakeholders going forward.
Yeah. And in your experience, have you ever had any challenges around getting the stakeholders to engage and to come to those meetings at all? I know everybody's always stretched for time in some way. So how do you best sort of set the scene for those meetings and place an importance in people investing their time for those?
So, I mean, I think the key thing is book them in a long time in advance when diaries don't get clogged up, and keep on top of those. It's also making sure that the way the data is displayed is engaging. Rows and columns of figures and not going to work. So it's appropriate use of graphics and having them to illustrate a simple message, which can then prompt further conversation. But it's also making sure that non-scheduled meeting communication is key as well. Mm-hmm. So having that conversation over the water cooler, albeit not at the moment.
Not anymore.
Or, just dropping someone an email going, acutely aware of the fact we haven't caught up outside of the regular reporting framework. Have you got 15 minutes for a virtual coffee? And it's managing that balance between the data and the insight and the stories that bind them together, coupled with the stakeholder relationship, which is going to be really key.
Yeah, you touched an interesting point there around graphical reporting and almost you want to create a narrative with the reports that you produce. Have you got any specific tips around how best you can use graphs or visual data or creating that kind of narrative, almost like a bit of a storyboard?
So 2 or 3. The first is ask the stakeholder or the audience what they like, because that's a much easier way to do it than creating something from scratch, because they're more likely to buy into it, especially if they feel they've had some input into creating the content initially.
Yeah.
The second is never hesitate to use people in a function which is more creative. So talk to the marketing team, the brand team, the sales team, whoever you might have access to say what works for you. Are there new things we haven't thought about? And it's great to get their expertise, because sometimes they'll agree to design them for you. But there's also understanding what the key message is you want to portray. So if you want to show a trend, have a line chart rather than a pie chart. If you want to show a static piece in time, have a pie chart rather than a line chart or a scatter graph. And it's really working out and how you want the conversation to go. Because usually it's a TAA function. You'll try to be proactive, you'll try to anticipate what's coming down, and having this graphic to steer the conversation in the direction you want it to go, albeit it might not necessarily work like that, is absolutely key. And if nothing else, playing around with the graphs function on Excel is always a diverting 15 to 20 minutes to see what works for you. And because there are always new features being introduced, and places like Recruiting Brain Food or The Firm on LinkedIn or blogs such as the Job Train one, you'll pick up snippets of information from there. So it's always worth spending a couple of hours, I'd say a week, but probably a fortnight, just reading around what other people are doing, because there might be some nuggets in there that will work for you.
I think that's really good advice in terms of looking outside of your own organization. And yeah, I absolutely agree in terms of the firm and the insights that they can offer as a member organization. And, Recruiting Brain Food's free, and there's just tons of information in there, that you can glean out. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. So you will have used, no doubt, quite a lot of ATSs in your time.
Yes.
In terms of getting to grips with each individual vendor's reporting function and capability, how have you done that? And what tips have you got in terms of making sure that you're getting the very best from it? Because they're all different and they all offer different levels of sophistication.
Very true. So in the interest of full transparency, having internal MI capability that's much better at this than I am means that I'm perhaps as not sophisticated as I should be. But I guess looking at how we've evolved our own reporting, it's very much that, right, what do we want to know? What are the key areas for us? How do we get that information out of the ATS or even CRM? And sometimes the reporting it's got is great, and you can just custom build your own reports. Other times it's actually worth having that conversation with them to see how easy it is to get the raw data and exporting it in some form of spreadsheet and having a play with it yourself, which I appreciate is not something that everyone in a TA function has the time to do, rather, because it's always focusing on the proactive, the sorting the roles. But it can be quite a useful function having a play yourself.
Yeah, for sure. We are all busy, but I think what's being highlighted here is it's a critical element of recruiting and talent acquisition to actually understand what is taking place, tease out of that, right, what action do we need to take against that as well, but probably take time or create time to become better or more proficient at understanding data or producing the data that we need to. And I think with that in mind, we've had general themes through the course of these sessions, but my advice would be absolutely engage with your vendor. Reporting, I mean, there's different levels of it, and certainly within our job train world, we have the insights dashboard I made reference to before, which is front and center, which is very, very clear, very vivid in terms of actionable insights. You've then got a level of standard reporting, but then there's within job training you have a full-blown reporting and insights tool, so you can create reports and that kind of thing. And also, it's a statistician's dream, if you like, but obviously it's quite involved as well. So again, it's one of those old adages: don't suffer in silence. Do go and have a chat with your vendor about exactly what you're looking to achieve. And if there's additional training and that kind of thing that's required, then, work with them to make sure that you're pulling that out. Ultimately, it is in the vendor's interest to make sure that you're, as a user, understanding the benefit you're gaining from using that system, from using their system to manage your recruitment. And ultimately, that's going to go straight back up to leadership in terms of, right, this is the benefit that we're getting from using this particular platform or this part of it and that kind of thing. And hopefully that leads me quite nicely on to, we've looked at a lot of the typical measures within a TA function. But the sad fact is that quite often recruitment and talent acquisition is seen as more of a cost center than it is as a profit center. So I'm going to ask you for a few bits of advice around how might you look at other areas of reporting to demonstrate the true and real value that talent acquisition delivers to a business in terms of its, its capability, its growth, and ultimately its profit as well, because people are at front and center of a business, is its heartbeat.
Crikey, that's a topic. So it's establishing the benchmark against which you want the TA function to be measured. So the archetypal old-fashioned one is, in purely cash terms, what would be the difference between engaging an agency for 80% of the roles that we've got, assuming 20% referrals and internal, and comparing it on a pure cost like-for-like basis. But as TA functions become, excuse me, there's some banging in the background, forgive me. God only knows what that is. But it's then working out how, with all the other things that a TA function is the custodian of, say, for example, the employer brand. Mm-hmm. How do you measure engagement with a business through a TA function as compared to an agency? And you know that being on the same side, the TA function is going to take much better care of it.
Yeah.
You've then got the opportunity to look at year-on-year improvements. So it could be a simple metric such as reduction in time to hire, albeit that's going to be diminishing returns as a TA function becomes more effective. You can look at improvement in media spend because you've taken the information you've got from prior reports and identified that certain channels are better for certain roles and can refine your forecast or buying power appropriately. You can also look at some slightly newer measures. So we were in the process of starting to adopt the empty desk measure.
Yeah.
So rather than just pure time to hire, which is still key because it gives an indication into recruiter and hiring manager partnership and effectiveness, it's looking at the workforce plan, identifying where the talent pools need to be, how effective those talent pools are, so that when a live requisition comes up, we already know we've got people positioned ready for that, can quickly rescreen them, qualify them again, make sure they're relevant. But the idea then being that you reduce empty desk time from not months, hopefully, but some roles might be, to weeks, to days, to actually getting to the point where you have the option to get someone on board so there's an overlap and handover. Yeah. So all of our recruiter efficiency reports are based on it takes a recruiter between 8 and 12 weeks to get up to speed. So the quicker you can bring that closer to the incumbent leaving, whether it be internally or externally, getting up to speed, the more effective you're going to be, the more people you're going to place from an RPO perspective, the happier a client is going to be that we have continuity and continuation of excellent service.
Yeah. So again, it's basically making sure that you've got a handle on the data around what the future needs are like to be around workforce planning.
Absolutely.
And make sure you
critical.
Yeah. Ensuring that you're really clear for any given role exactly what your likely lead time is going to be.
Yes.
It's all going off over there, isn't it? I know you're having some home improvements
on the wall. I'm so sorry. There's not much I can do about it.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. So you got those key areas, and I guess following on from that, what is the cost of the business if that person isn't in post? And I think sometimes, is it fair to say that these requirements come around, but they're not budgeted for? in terms of media spend, or if you do need to use a specialist agency for a given role? I think quite a lot of time people get caught out by those types of things because it's simply not budgeted for.
If we could budget for everything, we arguably could forecast everything, and we would have a TA function that was working on vacancies 12 months down the line. A lot of the time, it's taking historical data, having a conversation with the hiring community, working out what leeway you have got with the budget, but also it can be looking at the team structure. So is there a way through increased use of channel X and branding on channel Y that you can improve the applicant flow in areas where it was not easy to fill, but more likely to be filled through an applicant, and then redirect that internal resource, or look at the model that you have in your TA team to set people targets to grow a talent pool or community? Or can that be linked in with the marketing team or the brand management team or whatever? So it's not just TA acting in isolation, it's seeing what other resource there is in the rest of the business that can be leveraged, coupled with a bit of creativity in the team. And that might be using a bit of tech, who knows? But looking at the plan and saying, right, this is where we'd like to be.
Yeah. I really, in terms of we're looking at our time, we're running out quickly. This has been really, really helpful. Real interesting takeaways for me are looking at bringing different stakeholders into the conversation around reporting and insights. And one of the things I really loved was actually getting marketing involved in terms of producing storyboards and bringing reports and data to life that other stakeholders, and seeking some consultation with stakeholders about exactly what they would want to see, what's going to be a real value to them, with a specific eye on, leadership or C-suite as well, to demonstrate TA's value, so that the storyboards that you're presenting or the data that you're presenting is something that is meaningful to them, but also helps to truly demonstrate the effectiveness of talent acquisition or recruitment function.
Yeah, and I'd add, get as much of an analyst or support from MI or finance as you possibly can, to free your time up from wading through the data to enable you to make some more longer term strategic decisions about how your entire function operates. Brilliant.
Alex, thank you. I'm just looking to see if we've got any questions from anybody. I have a quick question from John Connolly here. What are your top 3 KPI metrics that you find best to measure efficiency, and why?
So the 3 key ones for me are going to be time to hire, because that is the base measure, albeit we will transition that to empty desk. The second is source of hire, because that feeds into our talent pooling, branding activity, as well as the effectiveness of our direct advertising. And the third one is probably the recruiter funnel, because it gives us an insight into how much activity goes into filling a particular role. And if you then have a number of roles that are similar over the course of a given time period, you can actually start building up an activity-based management model, which suggests how long a role should take to fill, and start working backwards to redirect the recruitment marketing spend, the recruitment marketing outreach, to build the talent pools for the roles that are taking longer.
Great. And a question here about BAME reporting and D&I reporting. Any specific tips in terms of how you've managed to achieve that quite successfully and effectively?
So,
and different ways you can slice and dice it as well for different stakeholders again.
Well, it is, and a lot of that comes back from the information that the ATS is configured to capture at application stage.
Yeah.
And of course, in an ideally set business, the recruiting team would not have sight of that to ensure the minimization of any unconscious bias through the selection and screening stage. So for us, we separate that out entirely, and our reporting team give that D&I and all related information to the HR team. So we can then work with them to identify where it's working well and it's not.
Yeah. So making sure you're capturing the right data at application stage. Because obviously you measure it, you can report on it, and you can improve on it. And then almost like having a protected group that then look at actually analysing that data as well.
Yes.
Brill. I think that's it for questions. Alex, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy day, because I know you are busy right now, to share some of your thoughts and you know, a lot of your experience as well. So it's very much appreciated. For everybody else, thank you for joining us this morning. Please come back again next week, where we're going to be talking all about hiring manager effectiveness, creating positive partnerships with them. I know that's a constant topic that comes up, so we're going to do our best to nail it next week. I hope you all have a great rest of the week, and see you this time next week. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Alex. Bye-bye.